Okay, so you want to own an EV battery recycling business. You collect old electric car batteries, break them down, pull out the lithium, nickel, cobalt, and copper, and sell those materials back to battery manufacturers. Simple, right? Except the real opportunity isn't sitting inside today's pile of dead batteries. In 2025 alone, electric vehicles deployed about 1.2 terawatt hours of batteries globally, up almost 30% from the year before, and more than 7 times the level of 2020. And the International Energy Agency estimates that around 1.2 million EV batteries could reach the end of their lives in 2030, rising to roughly 14 million by 2040. That's an enormous future supply of lithium, nickel, cobalt, copper, and other materials. But here's the catch. Most of those batteries aren't actually available to you yet. Today's recycling industry is still dominated by manufacturing scrap, while the huge wave of retired EV batteries doesn't arrive at full scale until the 2030s. So, the real business isn't simply recycling batteries, it's controlling the batteries before everyone else realizes they're valuable. Understand that gap, and you understand this business. Miss it, and you could spend tens of millions building a recycling plant that doesn't have enough batteries to keep it running. Because here's what's happening. The world spent years putting batteries into cars. Now you're waiting for those batteries to come back. And that waiting period is where the economics get interesting. Think about what an EV battery actually represents. When you look at an electric car, you see a vehicle. A battery recycler sees a concentrated inventory of industrial materials: lithium, nickel, copper, cobalt, graphite, aluminum, and depending on the chemistry, the value can be very different. The global EV battery industry has exploded because electric vehicles require enormous amounts of energy storage. In 2025, EVs represented more than 70% of global battery deployment, with China alone accounting for around 60% of global EV battery deployment. And that means every year, millions of battery cells are entering the global fleet. But you probably think the customer for battery recycling is the person who owns the dead battery. Usually it isn't. Your real customer is much further up the supply chain. It's the battery manufacturer, the automaker, the materials processor, the energy storage company, or the company that wants a reliable source of critical minerals without digging another mine. That's why companies like Redwood Materials are building businesses around recovering battery materials and putting them back into the battery supply chain. Redwood says it currently recycles more than 20 gigawatt hours of lithium-ion batteries per year and recovers more than 95% of critical materials including lithium, nickel, cobalt, and copper. And governments want this industry to exist too. The US Department of Energy has allocated billions of dollars towards strengthening the domestic battery supply chain, including battery recycling and critical mineral processing. Why? Because recycling gives you something mining doesn't. You already have the material. The lithium has already been extracted, the nickel has already been refined, the cobalt has already been processed. The battery was manufactured. You just have to recover the valuable stuff. But not all battery recycling businesses are the same. There are really 4 different businesses hiding inside this industry. The first is collection and logistics. You don't necessarily own a giant chemical processing plant. You collect damaged, defective, or end-of-life batteries from automakers, dealers, dismantlers, and other recyclers, and move them safely to the next stage. The margins can be relatively thin, but the capital requirements are much lower. The second is battery dismantling and pre-processing. You receive battery packs, discharge and dismantle them, separate components, and turn the material into an intermediate product such as black mass. This can offer better economics, but now you're dealing with specialized equipment, fire protection, hazardous material handling, and highly trained workers. The third is full material recovery. This is where things get serious. You take the processed battery material and chemically recover useful metals, potentially higher value, potentially higher margins, but also dramatically higher capital requirements, environmental compliance, and process risk. And then there's the fourth model, reuse. Instead of immediately destroying the battery, you test it. Maybe it still has 70%, 80%, or 90% of its original capacity. You could potentially repurpose it for stationary energy storage. That sounds fantastic. But there's a problem. New batteries keep getting cheaper, and every used battery comes with uncertainty around remaining life, safety, warranty, and liability. The IEA specifically notes that dismantling, repurposing, and safety requirements can make second life applications economically difficult. So, what is the single most important number in this business? It's not recovery efficiency. It's not the price of lithium. It's feedstock. How many batteries can you actually get through your facility? Because imagine you spend $30 million building a recycling operation capable of processing 20,000 tons of batteries per year. Your fixed costs don't care whether you process 20,000 tons or 8,000. Your building still exists, your equipment still depreciates, your insurance still gets paid, your engineers still need salaries. Your permits don't get cheaper because your machines are sitting idle. Let's say your facility costs $5 million a year to operate in fixed expenses. At full utilization, you process 20,000 tons and generate $15 million in contribution margin. You have $10 million left before financing, taxes, and other costs. Sounds great. Now suppose battery supply falls to 12,000 tons. Your revenue falls with it, but your $5 million fixed cost doesn't. If contribution margin falls from $15 million to $9 million, your operating profit drops from $10 million to $4 million. You didn't lose 40% of your capacity. You lost 60% of your profit. That's the economics of a capital-intensive recycling business. Utilization matters. And feedstock contracts matter even more. So, what does it take to actually get into this business? If you're imagining renting a warehouse and buying a few industrial shredders for $200,000, forget it. A serious commercial operation can require millions or tens of millions of dollars before you process your first meaningful volume. You need industrial land, you need electrical infrastructure, you need fire suppression, you need battery storage areas, you need specialized handling equipment, you need ventilation and monitoring systems, you need insurance, you need environmental compliance. And depending on your jurisdiction, you may need hazardous material permits and approvals governing how batteries are stored, transported, and processed. Lithium-ion batteries aren't ordinary scrap. The US EPA explicitly warns that used lithium-ion batteries should not go into household garbage or ordinary recycling bins, because damaged batteries can create serious fire hazards. Now imagine you're storing hundreds of tons of them. That changes the entire business. Your landlord cares, your insurer cares, your local fire authority cares, your environmental regulator cares, and your neighbors definitely care. Let's build a hypothetical facility. Say you lease or purchase an industrial site large enough for a 20,000-ton per year operation. You might spend $2 million to $5 million on land and site development. Depending heavily on location, another $3 million to $8 million could go into buildings, fire protection, electrical systems, and specialized storage. Processing and dismantling equipment could push another $5 million to $15 million. Then add laboratory equipment, safety systems, forklifts, monitoring equipment, software, and installation. Suddenly, your hypothetical startup budget can easily reach $15 million to $35 million. Before you've built the chemical recovery side of the operation, and if you want a sophisticated, full-scale material recovery facility, you're potentially talking about a much larger investment. This is why government support matters. The US Department of Energy has programs specifically supporting commercial-scale battery recycling facilities and recycling infrastructure, including a $3 billion battery manufacturing and recycling grants program. But even if you have the capital, you still have one problem. Where do the batteries come from? Because this is where the economics get strange. The industry is preparing for a flood of end-of-life batteries, but today, that flood hasn't arrived. The IEA says the recycling industry is currently dominated by manufacturing scrap, while most batteries deployed over the last several years remain in vehicles and storage systems. Many will continue operating until the mid-2030s or even longer. That creates a weird situation. You can have a giant recycling plant, you can have advanced technology, you can have demand for recycled materials, and still not have enough batteries. China illustrates the problem. It has more than 85% of global battery recycling capacity, according to the IEA, but recycling capacity is currently greater than available feedstock in many parts of the world. So the smartest recycler isn't necessarily the company with the biggest machine. It may be the company that has the best relationships, the automaker that gives you its batteries, the dismantler that sends you its damaged packs, the battery manufacturer that gives you production scrap, the logistics network that can collect material before your competitor does. That's your moat. Because once thousands of tons of batteries start reaching end of life, everyone will know they're valuable. And by then, the easy part, building the machine, may not be the hardest part. Getting the feedstock will be. Now let's talk about profitability. Suppose your small independent operation processes 5,000 tons of battery material annually. Your revenue isn't simply tons times lithium price. You have to account for battery chemistry, recovery rates, processing costs, transportation, purchase price of feedstock, energy, labor, and the value of the recovered materials. And chemistry matters enormously. LFP batteries now account for more than 55% of global EV battery deployment, according to the IEA. That's important because LFP batteries contain less of some high-value metals than nickel-rich chemistries. So the battery industry's transition toward cheaper chemistries is actually creating a problem for recyclers. You can recycle a battery extremely efficiently and still struggle economically if the material inside isn't worth enough to cover your costs. That's why toll-based recycling could become important. Instead of making all your money from selling recovered metals, you can charge a customer for the recycling service, while the customer retains ownership of the recovered material. The IEA identifies this as one potential model, particularly for lower-value chemistries such as LFP. Now compare that with a company like Redwood Materials. You're no longer talking about a small recycling shop. You're talking about an integrated supply chain business that collects batteries, recovers critical minerals, refines them, and manufactures materials for the battery industry. That's a completely different scale. The small operator is selling a service. The giant operator is trying to own the entire material loop. And that distinction matters. Because the biggest risk isn't that electric vehicles disappear, it's almost the opposite. EV batteries are becoming cheaper. Battery chemistries are changing. New battery technologies are emerging. Second-hand EV markets are growing. And batteries can stay in vehicles longer than expected. All of these things can delay the moment when your giant supply of dead batteries actually becomes available. The IEA estimates that recycling could eventually supply around 20% to 30% of global lithium, nickel and cobalt demand by 2050 under favorable collection assumptions. That's enormous, but it is not tomorrow. So should you actually get into this business? If you have $20 million, industrial experience, chemical processing expertise, regulatory patience, and, most importantly, guaranteed access to battery feedstock, this could become one of the most strategically important recycling businesses on the planet. If you're an entrepreneur with $200,000 and a dream of buying a warehouse and becoming the next battery billionaire, stay away. The machines aren't the business. The batteries aren't even the business, and the supply chain is the business. Because an old EV battery isn't valuable simply because it contains lithium. It's valuable because someone has already spent years paying to extract, refine, and manufacture the materials inside it. Your job is to capture those materials again. And when millions of batteries finally reach the end of their first life, the companies that already control the pipeline won't be looking at garbage. They'll be looking at inventory. The next gold mine might not be underground. It might already be sitting in your driveway.